This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
So I will start the meeting. Is it recording, Connie? Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll start. It's 5:04 p.m. Opening up the meeting. We are going to start with just some general reintroductions because not everyone was here. This is our second meeting formally. So what I'd love to do is maybe just go around, and I know we have members of the public as well. We will have time for public speak after reintroductions, and so we'll go right into that after we just intro. So I'll kick things off. My name is Felicia. I'm city councilor for precinct 2, and I am on this committee. Excited to be here with you all.
Also, I think you have to name the committee that we're on from.
The Rent Study Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Go ahead.
Donna Chappello. I am an attorney. I sit on the Fair and Affordable Housing Partnership, and I am a tenant at Eastworks. So I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Jim McQuaid. I sit on the Easthampton Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership, and I'm also a city councilor-elect.
Connie Denham. I sit on city council as a at-large councilor.
Jim Kayon, independent theoretical physicist. I've lived in Easthampton for 20 years and want to keep living here.
Kevin Perrier from Norwich Properties, landlord and developer.
Hi, David Boyle, town resident and a property owner as well. And I had a little statement, but I can wait on that.
You are on the agenda, so feel free to go ahead, David.
Okay, I'll be brief. Okay, I just want to just mention a few things. After viewing the first meeting, I realized that I misunderstood the nature of the committee. I incorrectly thought that this was a fact-finding committee studying the current Easthampton rental housing situation. I thought the purpose was to come up with recommendations in the event that a statewide ballot question regarding rent control passage. One passage next fall. My understanding now is that the committee has a narrow focus with the goal of implementation. I just mentioned that. Is that more or less correct?
So the committee has two main purposes to it.
Right.
Let me just pull up the language so it can be really specific about it.
Can I keep that before you, because I am in agreement with you, where I looked at the letter that I received as a committee member, and I looked at the resolution, and the way in which I have interpreted this, and I know I wasn't here to be a part of this discussion previously, but it looks to me like the city council had approved a resolution to take a look at whether a home rule petition and whether that was a legislative petition to the general court, and to explore the creation of that. But then this part of the letter to study and analyze the Easthampton housing market seems to me to be the sort of the prelude that has to happen in order for the city council to be able to identify what the petition should say. So I don't see that they are necessarily different from one another. And I think that our task is not necessarily to draft the petition, although I think we could do that at some point. But I don't think that we can get to that point, or the city council can get to that point, until we're able to look at these other pieces of information that they are asking us to look at.
So I think that some of this can be happening in conjunction, and definitely other people feel free to jump into, but I'll just reiterate the sort of the two main focuses as voted on by city council in the initial resolution that we all agreed on back whatever that was. So the first task, and it doesn't mean first as in this has to happen first before the second task, but just the first task, task A, is to explore the creation of a legislative petition requesting that we be allowed to implement rent control, or rent stabilization rather. So that's, that language can be up for interpretation, but explore the creation, I think, is relatively broad and doesn't have to necessarily be super narrow as in terms of drafting the petition. It's exploring the creation. Second task is studying, analyzing, and reviewing any other acts the city might take to more effectively support and protect Easthampton renters, which should include a review of the city's existing bodies and programs related to housing. So I think that kind of covers a bit of what you were speaking to, David, if I'm
Yeah.
not wrong, right?
Well, yeah, and I just brought this up just only not to advocate for what anyone just said, just to be upfront and honest. I mean, just upfront about where I was called, and I said yes, and the old saying, if you assume something, you get in trouble, and I was assuming more than I knew, but in further to my effort to be upfront, I was the chair of the master plan committee in 2010. I was on the EDIC for 20 years. I was on both school committees, so I've been around, and I don't like to waste anyone's time. So I just want to put a few things out there. And they're not going to make everybody happy, but and then we can move on from that. At the moment, I'm opposed to any exemptions for smaller properties such as 1, 2, 3, 4 family rental units. The effort to address the housing crisis should be borne by all and also not create different classes of rental ownership. I'm opposed to any forms of controls on commercial space and or any consideration of artist space. Any form of rent stabilization that does not include other forms of tenant relief and resolutions to create more housing, including market rate through zoning changes. So examples, if we're going to have rent stabilization, I think personally, in addition to that, we should look at some kind of language that would have a period of rent freezes after an ownership change. And I don't mean an ownership change from an LLC to a partnership. I mean a sale, specifically to an out-of-state purchaser, or maybe a period of notice for tenants for rent increases after ownership change. I mean, the classic example we had that spurred some of this on, in all honesty, was despicable, disgusting, and egregious. To come home and see a notice picked on your door, it's just total inconsideration of human people. And so anyway, that's it. That's where I'm coming from. So you can paint me as Black Ace, and that's what he is, and then we'll work together from there on.
Well, I think there's room for all of this, and this is why it's great that we have a really varied group of people. We have landlords, we have renters, we have people all in between. And I think your perspective, David, in my opinion, is valuable because as we get further into the work of these two different tasks, this is exactly what we'll be debating and discussing. So I think it's good for us to know where you stand in the beginning, and I look forward to having you continue to
Thank you.
that on this committee. But opening up to other folks too. I'm just one voice, so yeah.
I'll just add, I would agree that I think that the exploration of what the facts of the housing market was like the first step that like the city of Boston took in their process, which I think is like a really good model for us. Like the first presentation was demographics of the housing market and how the crisis is affecting the actual residents of Boston. And I think that we could do something similar with Easthampton, and like I have all that data, so it would be really easy for me to throw together a presentation.
Yeah, I think that the broad nature of the ask allows us to be able to do some of these other pieces, right? So I think that what we're doing is we're looking for this information, right? And so we need to figure out what is that information we want, and then we kind of explore that, right? And then do we get to this other bigger piece of a whole new rule change? We have to figure that out. But certainly, I think some of these starting points, right, are what we need to discuss and figure out, right? Because I think that's going to help us to be able to.
Right, and I think that's two different things, Connie, and I think that they can happen simultaneously. You can look at what is the process for a home rule petition, and we can also look at, do we really need that, given the statewide petition? Once the statewide petition is in, how is that going to impact on us and what we do and what we present to the city council? And at the same time, look at Kayam's data, which thank you for putting that on the web where we can all look at that, Kayam. But he's already collected a lot of data that we can use as a starting point, certainly, to provide the information that will support whatever it is we determine is appropriate, and then fit that into whatever process we decide to do or understand as the appropriate process moving forward, because it is a legal process that needs to.
And we had
Sorry.
started this, yeah, just one second. We had started this before that
Yeah,
statewide petition had
right,
come out, right?
right,
So it's,
right.
My biggest concern right now is making sure those who are going to be impacted the most are not going to be in a position where they have to suffer as a consequence of legalities, that there's real protections afforded them as a result of Easthampton recognizing the value in every aspect of bringing about these protections, Donna. That's the first thing that comes to mind, because what I'm seeing right now is if we're talking about a legislative, a referendum, that's a year out, and there's going to be a lot of people that are in this very same position a year from now or earlier. In my case, July 1st, and I don't have the money. Can't work, so it's a situation where I'm looking to basically figure out ways of reducing significantly the cost pressures, which are going to make it more difficult when these increases are announced to tenants. I don't know exactly what can be done to really be proactive with respect to this. But I think it's important to recognize how many different ways that tenants are being impacted at this moment, and their health is in jeopardy as a consequence.
Well, and I think that's what Felicia, if you don't mind me paraphrasing you, I think that's what Felicia was saying, that there should be, that as we go through this process, we need to be looking at those things as well. And some of that information also is on the state website, in their housing materials. It's not a lot for Easthampton, but there is some information for Western Mass.
The other key is that the state acknowledges the validity of these threats, and I think in certain instances they may not necessarily, and that's a big problem because it's only now coming to the surface. Something I'll talk about in a couple of minutes that Felicia's aware of with respect to my agenda item.
Yeah, I think they are aware. I mean, if you look at the housing plan that's just been implemented, some of the legislation has recently been passed on the statewide level, excuse me. So, you'll see that I think the state is aware of some of these things, and they are looking for ways to help tenants, as well as protect landlords and others.
Well, here's the problem, and I'll make this very brief. Because Massachusetts is so committed to being green, a lot of times they do not recognize the hazards of certain types of things that present as green, particularly with respect to wireless radiation. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on. And it's a big problem.
If I can just add, I know we have to get to public speaking, but I think, at least in my head, I think it can be yes and. Like we have Senate Bill 1447, which we're waiting to see what happened with that on the legislative level. And that would, it would negate the need to do a home rule petition. And then we also have the ballot initiative. And I think that this allows us to sort of start answering some of those bigger questions about like the pillars of the policy, like, right. And we can get into the specifics later, but, and then
I'm sorry, can we just say what that is? This statute you just referenced, or the bill you just referenced?
The 1447? Yeah, that's the, that would lift the statewide ban on rent stabilization. That's the bill that the city supported in its city council resolution a few months ago.
And the same bill is being, that has been petitioned across the state, where signatures have been collected for it, right?
Well, that's not the signature one. This is a bill, and then the signatures is a ballot initiative that would go on the ballot in 2026. And that is, instead of lifting the ban, that actually sets a one-size-fits-all blanket cap across the state, right? Which I have conflicted feelings about.
When was the bill introduced?
Just this legislative session?
Yeah, this legislative session, when they started.
So that's after July 1st?
no,
I'm not sure. It was early.
Yeah, early.
Yeah. No, but there was a hearing at the end of August that the joint hearing, and I think there was like a 90-day period where they could either extend it or send it to study. So we're waiting on, I actually just texted Omar earlier today asking about where that bill was.
So you think it's in a 90-day period?
So all that being said, like this process would help us establish and answer some of the questions around like the pillars of like what the rent cap would be, the exemptions, what like the market reset, the administration, and the exceptions and that kind of stuff. Like all those nitty-gritty details, we can start the conversations ahead of time. So if that bill passes, we have a policy that's tailor-made for Easthampton that we can just work on advocating for it to pass. And if it does come to the point where we do submit it to the state, like it just adds to the legislative pressure of they need to solve housing, both on the supply side and also in the protecting tenant side. So that's my rant about that.
Thank you. I would love to put a pin in our conversation right now so we can save that for the next agenda item, but I want to open up to public speak. So, because I know we have some members of the public here and anyone else who might want to speak as well. We'll just take a limit of 3 minutes per share, but if anyone of you would like to speak, please go ahead.
Kathy Wazinski, Overland Drive. I wanted to just bring up a couple of variables that I hope that the committee will look at as sort of driving some of this, some of these rental issues. One of them being the unreasonable and ineffective restrictions on gas and pushing of green energy that is causing some of the increased costs, both for homeowners and for people who own rental units, making them more expensive to bring online, but also to maintain going forward. The other big issue that I think is important to consider is the abuse of landlords in housing court, which is part of what's driving the corporate landlords being able to buy up so much in the area, because private small landlords are jumping ship because they can't manage being without rents for 2 months, 6 months, 2 years, while a housing court continues to just allow someone who refuses to work, refuses to pay rent, to maintain a residence without paying rent. And landlords who might be living in the apartment or might have paid off their mortgage, potentially losing their buildings, and they're at risk of doing that. And so they're selling off to corporate landlords so they don't have to be abused in housing court. It becomes ridiculous for someone to be able to stay in an apartment for 2 years, and then the landlord has to pay them to move. And then once they finally move, you've got a apartment that is trashed and full of stuff that you then have to move out. And the abuse of landlords in the housing court is getting ridiculous. And when you have housing lawyers saying they would never be landlords in Massachusetts, that's scary to think that the system is so messed up that people are just jumping ship. And that's part of the reason we have the influx of corporate landlords. I think the other reason we've had an increase of a flurry of rent increases is because of some of the rent control proposals now are suggesting that rents be set as of January 1st, 2026, and that the percentage increases will be based on that. And so lots of landlords are hurrying and scurrying to increase their rents now before that January 1st deadline. And those bills were proposed, some of those bills were proposed last spring, and we saw significant increases in rents in many places because of that. And so we've got many variables that are impacting these rent increases. And I think it's important to look at all the variables and not just look at what's going on for tenants.
Anyone else?
Carl Kroll, 22 Gaston. I just want to hook up to, I forgot your name already. Jim's sentiments, but with keeping Kathy's in mind as well. You know, this is a crisis right now for so many of our community members. I spent a couple hours out at the community center. You'll see a lot of our neighbors living in their car, wandering off to who knows where to make their bed. We have a homeless situation now. We have a housing crisis now. And if we base all of our decisions and all of our actions as a city on how fast Beacon Hill is moving or how fast the federal government is moving, we're not going to move very fast at all. So I don't envy the task in front of you in figuring this out, but I think we need to have some agency to be acting at least on behalf of our most desperate neighbors to make sure that even if, again, Boston takes their time or these, legislation doesn't pass or gets held up for who knows how many reasons, that we can at least address it on a local level.
I want to speak to Kathy when she's back, possibly.
So public speak's not really about a back and forth. It's just about the
Okay,
public
again, I'm
sharing.
learning as
So-
I go.
Yeah, so all good. A lot of us are new to this. So what I would say is feel free to follow up with Kathy afterwards. But
Yep.
we'll just stick to the agenda for now. So if no one else has any other public speak, then what I would love to do is quickly take a look at the minutes from our last meeting, which I passed out a couple copies. And actually, I want to make sure pretty good. And just if you haven't already had a chance to take a look at the minutes, look over them really quickly, and I would love to entertain a motion to.
I'll make a motion to adopt minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
I'm gonna abstain. That was,
Yes, that's great.
I'll vote yes, but I reviewed the meeting later.
Okay.
I watched the video.
Like I should abstain also since I was in the
So we've got David and Connie abstaining. And we have everyone else control the meeting.
I mean, they're
For some of it,
I
yeah.
was just long enough to introduce myself because I hadn't. So I just talked about that.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so now we get to the meat of it. So this is the fun part. It's what we're getting into already. So I intentionally tried to make this agenda item pretty broad because we have a lot to talk about. So what we need to get into for today is really, so we obviously have this committee. We have, I believe it's 9 members, I think. Yeah, 9 members. We're missing 2 today. We can add more people if needed. So for example, if we felt like we wanted more voices in any area, that's something that we can think about. But that aside, because we had the 2 focuses, one of the big things we talked about at our last meeting was splitting into 2 different subcommittees so that we could really address those 2 different areas separately and then kind of come back together and reconvene with this body. So that's the first thing I want to mention. And as part of that, because this is a brand new committee, we don't actually have any formal roles yet. And so I've just kind of been shepherding this through to make sure that we have the room and all this stuff together. But one of the things I'd asked at the end of last time, our meeting, was if anyone was interested in taking on a formal role such as chair or clerk for this meeting. So with that, I think that's a great place for us to start off with, because that'll help us kind of structure the rest of our committee from there on. So is anyone else interested in serving as the chair of this committee?
I think I've come around to potentially being interested.
Okay, great. Anyone else?
I am not, I spent 6 months in Tennessee. I'm not gonna be able to attend the meetings remotely. I think that kind of is too much distance to be. But I would say that after a chair is picked, that you might consider having a vice chair, just so that if some chair can't make it, vice chair maybe, if so, if people agree to that.
Okay. Anyone else interested in the chair position? We'll start there and then we'll go down from there. Thanks, David.
Well, the other option would be if people wanted to share the responsibilities in each meeting, it would be someone else who would be responsible for writing the minutes and setting the agenda.
That's definitely possible. I would say it's probably going to make our lives a little bit more complicated, just because then we have to sort of like make sure everyone gets up to speed every month. So if folks want to do it that way, definitely say the word. But I would advocate, just on my own experience, as having one point person will probably just be easiest, just in terms of both our communication and then communication with the city staff for setting up things like the rooms and everything. So. All right, so if Chaim's the only one who's interested, then I'd love to put this to a vote. So all in favor of Chaim as chair for this committee? Sure. All right, congratulations. Would you like to take over? Or would you like me to keep going with the rest of this meeting?
You keep going and I will learn on the job.
Okay. So the other roles that we can formalize could be a vice chair role. It could also be clerk role as well, which would basically be someone who's taking the minutes. That's something that's a little bit easier, Donna, for having that be more of a rotating role. But we can also formalize it too. So is anyone interested in either of those two roles, either being like a vice chair or a clerk?
You're looking at me.
Why don't you be the vice chair too?
Could they be the same person? Could we just like set a clerk vice chair?
They could be the same person. And I'm happy to be vice chair if needed, if that's helpful, if no one else is really interested.
I
Because
threw it out mostly because my experience has been not so much to have a vice chair, but for someone to think about filling in just to help out teamwork, that's all.
yeah, no, it's a good point.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I am if you want to nominate me.
All right, I nominate Tom.
Second. All right, all in favor of Donna? All right, Donna, welcome
Vice
to the
chair.
committee board.
Thanks.
All right. So other than that, we also were discussing subcommittees. And so the other ask I'd ask everyone to kind of think through was we have the two different topics, two different subcommittees. I feel like there's already some natural inclinations as far as where people kind of are thinking. But do we want to just kind of like maybe go around again and say what we're interested in? It could be flexible because again, you know, there's plenty of people, so we have enough if people wanted to be part of both subcommittees, but that is a lot of lift. So, you know, probably the easiest thing to do is if we each pick one subcommittee. But I know that there's a couple folks that I've been chatting with who seem like they're kind of tending towards one versus the other. So maybe we can just kind of go around. And if you're not sure, that's okay too. But maybe we can just kind of state if there's something that you're feeling more drawn to versus another topic. So why don't we start with you, Donna?
Well, did you have an idea in mind? I mean, I know that we have these two separate tasks. One is sort of legislative and analysis piece, and the other part is the advocacy piece. Do we have a sense of what those two roles will be accomplishing, or how much time either one of them might take, or how people see those roles?
When you say roles, can you just clarify?
So if you're sitting on, let's say we split into two committees, and then, so what would be your role? Like, what kind of role would you have to play if you were on the legislative piece of it? What kind of role would you play if you were on the advocacy piece of it? And how would, you know, certainly if we're collecting data about our city, Easthampton, how, you know, like how would we be sharing that information between the two? And how would we be communicating about what pieces of information would be most helpful and useful for each of those two subcommittees in what their respective roles were? So to sort of say what those roles might be, I think would be helpful for people to make a decision as to where they think they might fit.
So yeah, go ahead, David.
Well, regarding the number one committee, the legislative petition, it sounds to me like Chaim has a grasp of that and a lot of work and a lot of the data. So I would suggest that if you can make a presentation, a summary of all that, that would eliminate some of that subcommittee's work, so to speak. You know, and then maybe people would just gravitate towards what the next steps are. I guess I'm recommending that you give us a summary with then your idea of the next two steps on that topic. You have a grasp of it. And so you might as well just share it with us and enlighten us, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, like quickly right now.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, when it's appropriate, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm happy to have a presentation ready for the next meeting.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, Jim, I'll just
Sure,
quickly
no worries.
respond to Don, and then I want to get
Okay.
your voice in too. So this is how I was thinking of the subcommittee sort of roles, I guess, as you're putting it. The way I'm thinking about it is they're really like working groups, because a lot of what we're tasked with is digging into the data and looking into like how can we support people who are experiencing rent crises right now, and that's a lot of stuff that's going to be challenging for this committee to do on a monthly basis, because that's kind of the cadence that we're tasked with. And so the idea is that in between these monthly meetings, we'll have these working groups that will really be doing a lot of answering the questions that you're asking, to be honest, like, figuring out like what are the different things that you can be looking at the data. I don't know, right? It's pretty broad because there's a lot of room to play in these two areas. So it could be interviewing people at the community center. It could be reaching out to renters who are being impacted by the out-of-state landlords. There's a lot of space there. So that's the idea, is that it'll be a bit more ad hoc and it'll be a bit more flexible, so that when we come back together on a monthly basis, to your question around how will we be sharing that information, this is really the forum with which we'll be able to share that information. I think everyone knows this, but I was able to get IT put together a shared Google Drive for this committee. So I think everyone's seen that. I know at least a couple of you have gone in there already. Kimes put a lot of his data that you were referencing, David, in that folder already. We also have just logistical things like our agendas and minutes and things like that. But a lot of the data and presentations and reports are already in there. So it could be, maybe one of the subcommittees is reading some of that in between and then chatting through and meeting and then coming back here and letting us all know. So that way we don't all have to be in all the meetings all the time. So that's kind of how I was thinking about it.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like maybe the first task of each of these subgroups or subcommittees would be to say, this is what our goal is, this is what we're going to do coming forward, and have that be, like you are asking for a presentation. So, Kayam, if you're on the legislative piece of it, for example, then when we come back in a month, you would be reporting basically as to what the plans were for that subcommittee, and what the goals were for that subcommittee, and how you expect to do that work. Same thing with the advocacy piece. People will come back and say, well, we're going to look at this town and that town, or sort of describe whatever they decide is the best way to approach that, and come back to the committee and report that this is how we're approaching this now, and kind of have any discussion about that, but also try to move things forward so that we're not just sitting around chatting. Yeah.
Just wondering if perhaps it's premature to break up into a subcommittee if we don't necessarily have even a good description of that. I feel like maybe getting a broader overview of what we're doing and picking the direction. To Dave's point earlier, I originally thought this was more of a group about the exploring if there's rent control, what does that look like? I'm hearing everything from restructuring zoning to, trying to make sure the renters keep their, their leases and things and have a roof over their head, which obviously we all, I think, are in favor of. But my mind tends to be, fortunately, a very pragmatic place of, well, where do those funds come from? How do we do this? It sounds great, I get it, but this is a very macro problem. We're looking at this on a very micro level. At the end of the day, rents, in my opinion, are somewhat simplistic. It's supply and demand. If we had more supply, you wouldn't have the demand, and you wouldn't be landlords wouldn't have the ability to almost name your rent. We're getting emails and calls all the time from people literally desperate because they can't find somewhere to stay. They're at the most vulnerability to be paying more or committing to more than they even can. And then they're in the courts, the landlords aren't getting paid. This is a very high level macro problem that goes all the way back to, for me, zoning, and the fact that we spoke to that we adopted an extended energy code. I think that was a huge mistake and a massive setback for housing. I know as a developer, as soon as that was signed and Easthampton decided to do that, we can no longer develop multifamily housing. Your only multifamily housing I think you're going to see developed is affordable housing because it's state funded. No private developer can come in Easthampton, in my opinion, and build market rate housing anymore. It's a big blow for the demand. The costs are double of what they are to say build another community now because of that. And I think a lot of people, and not just for this committee, but misunderstand what affordable housing is and the income thresholds for that. So I think a lot of people say, well, we need affordable housing. I think people picture that as that's housing the average person, two family, maybe making $75,000 a year can afford. Chances are those people are not going to qualify for affordable housing as it's seen. We need to make housing affordable in a broader sense, that, in my opinion, that a family with some children can afford a reasonable rent. So it's just, it feels like it's a much bigger, high level discussion to get before we're necessarily breaking off and no longer kind of having how do we address this?
Kevin, what were you talking about when you said the restriction? The electrical restriction?
So the energy codes and building code essentially changed last year, and communities had the option to adopt an extended stretch code or energy code, which is much more restrictive. If memory serves me, I think 14 communities in the entire state adopted them. Locally, it was Easthampton, Northampton, Amherst. Amherst, I think you can pull it off. You can get $4,000 for a 2-bedroom. It's crazy to me, but you can do that. I think Northampton, Easthampton, you can't. And it was a very, for lack of a better term, it's just an uninformed decision that they made. I tried to speak out against it, and a lot of people pushing very hard, green energy. Well, when you say multifamily now basically has to be a passive home, solar panels and R60 in the walls, your cost of construction is double. I mean, just for example, the project we were doing on Pleasant Street, just far end, that was supposed to be close to 100 market rate apartments. That would have been a lot of housing brought to the town. That probably, yes, would have been $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 for a 2-family. As soon as that was adopted, I can't even come close to covering that. So it's townhomes, and not there's anything wrong with townhomes, but I think the town could have used 100 market rate, really nice apartments that are reasonable. They're not 2,500 for a 2-bedroom. We can't build them. So those, I guess that's what I'm saying. It's easy to say we have to keep tenants in their apartments. But really, when you get down to granular, what is that? What are we saying? What does that mean?
And the other thing is, it's hard. It's a macro level, but when the Parsons Street project was put in, almost 15 years ago, it was around $150, $175 a square foot. When private construction was around $95 to $125 a square foot. So there was a gap. Now that gap has really widened, and it has widened because there's no counterbalance of market rate housing. If market rate housing is being constructed at a steady rate, it helps keep affordable housing construction costs down. The contractors, the big contractors, it's basically buyer beware, what the market will bear, and just keep pushing. So if only affordable housing is being constructed, then that depends on the financial markets and all the various grants, and but that's funny money. Like even our 3 schools, I'm not sure that our 3 schools are going to be constructed. Because you have a New York City developer, and they're lawyered up. They don't have to commit. They have nothing in the game. They have no skin in the game. And if the financial markets collapse in next year, they're going to pull out. Affordable housing is wonderful, but it needs the market rate housing to be a counterbalance to it, to keep its costs down. What good is having, 500 square foot construction costs, $500? If you can't do for 250 or 300, you can't build those units for affordable housing.
Well, I'm glad you guys are here because you're actually educating me on some issues here.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, and then I'm sorry, I hit it 2 seconds, but I think that again, it's a worthwhile discussion for the general public to understand how affordable housing is built, because David hit it on the head. It is an open checkbook. The numbers to build in Western Mass, they essentially give the same numbers here as they do in Boston. You're talking, the schools, I know that they're going to be allowed, that they will come in around $600 to $800 a square foot. I know that. I know the developer, and we're actually supposed to be the builder for those. So believe me, I hope it happens. But you can't, that's state taxpayer money given to them annually. It's going to come in a lump sum, and they get a fee. Basically, their incentive is if they're going to get a 10% fee. So if these projects are $60 million, he's not going to make anything on renting those. He's going to get a check for $6 million for developing. That's how it works. And you're then going to have to qualify for that as a tenant, and the incomes are outrageous. Most people are not going to qualify. I know Harish Patel, not to speak for him, but he has affordable units that were on 47 Cottage Street project. They're still empty. You can't find a good tenants to meet that with the income level that also say have a credit score or or have the income. It's a really difficult balance, and they're extremely costly to manage. So, again, I think that term of let's make housing affordable for everybody needs to be properly understood what that actually means. Because I think what we really mean is making market rate housing more competitive than necessarily building more affordable.
Yeah, I want to make sure Jim has a chance to jump in. 'Cause I know
Okay,
you've been waiting
so I
patiently.
hear what you're saying, Kevin, for sure. No question. You as well, David. My proposal is that basically, I think a really good way of characterizing the subcommittee, because it covers everything. I'm looking at this from a very holistic standpoint. Quality of life impacts, because that's what's really eroding most, largely because of the economic realities that a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about, and especially for people that are over 50 years old. The situation is not tenable, and I think that we are in a crisis mode. I don't know how exactly it's going to be expediently resolved, but it's going to require an awful lot of resourcefulness. And there are many people in this state who don't like that word because it means they can't be the best, the biggest, and the best.
I know that there are subsidies to build in affordable housing, capital A affordable housing. Are there also subsidies that you as a developer can draw to do small A affordable housing?
I mean, I personally have only built market rate. It's just I don't have the patience for affordable. It takes years. I mean, most projects you're going to see are going to be 5, 8 years even from conception to a tenant living there. And like I said, the payday for a developer is that one-time fee. Really, you have to hold them for 30 years. You really make almost no money in between then. And after the 30 years, they're still deeded out as affordable. They're doing it to get the developer fee. That's really what that is. But that's what I'm saying. It's kind of, it would be nice if Easthampton really wants to help the housing. It's almost like the regulations or the zoning needs to be flipped. There's so much in favor of building affordable. You could get higher density, less parking. All of these things favor you developing affordable housing, but that takes years and years, and you're not helping the person who makes $50,000 a year. You're just not. They can't live there. We need to be able to build economical housing at a good rate that's high quality and develop and foster good landlords. I mean, there are bad landlords. I'm not, certainly wouldn't say I know some myself, but there's also good landlords trying to do good things and be fair. And it's kind of why you brought up that we are, it could take you a year and a half to get a tenant out. I mean, there's a lot of different factors on that I think people just, rent's too high. It is, but there's reasons for that.
One thing I wanted to say, conjoining with that, is I live in a place where I used to be able, I have a two-bedroom apartment. I used to have 2 spaces, one of which people could park in, but you could also have guests. That's all gone away just because it's sheer logistics. So there is a parking crisis to some extent in Easthampton. I don't know how much more is required in order to be able to meet that, but you're not dealing with a strictly pedestrian community either. There's too many people that have to have their own vehicles for a variety of reasons. Primarily, I think in the case of parents, they need that flexibility when it comes to their kids, whatever the circumstances, especially in this economy. parking is a big issue, in its own way.
I can, so I have three thoughts in response to a couple things that have been said. So first off, I would agree that the way that we fund and build capital A affordable housing is definitely really broken across the state. And like a lot of that is federal policy. The AMI is set by HUD, which is really like what determines the income level for this area is set by HUD, which is, it's very low. It doesn't make any sense for the cost of living around here. I would disagree that I think that capital A affordable housing is an important tool in our toolbox of like building. And like there is going to be a population of people who will need subsidized housing that aren't going to be able to like compete in the market. I also think that some of the things that you mentioned regarding our zoning are definitely important as well. And like some of that, like the parking discrepancy between affordable and market rate, that we're actually recommending to be flattened down to like 1 per unit, like regardless in our latest zoning recommendation. So that's definitely, I think that area is sort of being addressed with some of those efforts in zoning. And I think maybe the number 2 committee could be involved in taking a look at how zoning could be even more friendly to getting more market rate housing built in town. But I do think in terms of the purpose number 1 of the committee, it is really focused on the legislative process for like the specific market rate units and protecting tenants from unfair rent hikes. So I definitely think that like all those other things make a lot of sense in the broader scope of this committee's purpose. But I also think that we do have a very specific instruction in the first one, which is initiate this process. And what that process looks like, I think we can figure out. And we can look at like the model that I pulled from Boston that I think is a really good example. But yeah, that's sort of my thoughts. I think that like it is really clear, at least number 1 is really clear of where we move forward and what our next steps are. And number 2, I think is a lot more open-ended and like addressing some of the things that you mentioned.
To answer your last question, Susan, before the current situation, and I'll give it a dateline of COVID, there wasn't really subsidies for private developers, but a lot of Chapter 40B projects were hybrid projects, where they were a mix of market and mix of affordable. But as time has gone on in the current climate, anyone that wants to do that is either gotten out of the game or jumped into affordable housing with a big A type construction. That was a hybrid method. Like the project on East Street, there was market rate as well as, affordable. And they were more low key, but I think various things have worked against them. So they're kind of they're just lying fallow. They're not being used.
There's also the, now you can build ADUs as of right. You can take your single family home and turn it into a duplex if you can afford that. People for it.
It's all
These are like
a numbers game, and even an ADU, unless it's for your in-laws, honestly, it does not,
It's not cost effective.
it's not cost effective.
I looked into this
Yeah,
and it does
exactly.
not make any sense.
Well, it was a good first step. Step would have to be legislation in the banking world. The banking world looks at 2 families differently than single families.
It's true.
So it was like, this is great, but you need some help. You need, a little bit further.
Well, this discussion started with you asking me which committee I was interested in. And I guess I'm probably a better fit for, I've done a lot of advocacy work in my life, but I would rather do the legislative piece. I'd rather work on that.
That is also definitely what I'm interested in.
I would hope that's where you want to go.
I can fill gaps.
Jim, I'm going to assume you want to be on the subcommittee number 2, as we're calling
Yes,
it.
without a doubt. Not dismissing the importance of getting the legislative
These
pieces.
are
But
equally
my
important.
strengths right now, especially because of where I am and how much I'm seeing, That's where I want to be. This is a big problem.
Kevin, any preferences?
I guess this isn't sinking into me today. I don't know. My brain's not firing all cylinders. I'm trying to see what,
Well, and like here's the reality too, is like we can also say if you're like not sure, like we don't have to have people specific, like we don't have to have all of us assigned to one subcommittee or another. You know what I mean? Because to your point, the general discussion is also just as important too. So if you're not feeling super called to one or another,
well, I guess I'm
you
just
know.
wondering which one's focuses more on, kind of sort of the nitty-gritty and looking at the details of how that's structured. Like to me, again, you say rent control, there's a lot of variables there. You can't just blanketly say, here's the percentage that you can increase every year because there's, is there a major remodel? Is it, I mean, there's, especially if you, last meeting, there was a discussion of this possibly affecting commercial. I think that's, man, that's a really slippery slope. There's so many details that you could really hinder development and progress in the town by saying that commercial, I mean, did you sink $1 million into this property to, custom build out for a tenant? Or I mean, there's just a multitude of details. So I guess whichever area is going to focus more on the nitty gritty of those items, I feel like that's my my strength.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be the legislative piece, because I think the
Yeah,
first thing that we're
I
gonna be
would, I would
looking at,
agree.
I think the first thing, first thing would be for the committee to decide what they're gonna look at. But I think that your perspective would be really helpful in terms of understanding what the data says and how that translates into a proposal for building or renovating or whatever, whatever it is, and for looking at, so like Boston has these different recommendations in terms of how you would be allowed to raise rent, when you'd be allowed to raise the rent. And that, I think that's something that you would be very helpful in kind of giving a perspective on that, different from my perspective as a person who's always been a tenant.
And if I can be more specific, like the example from Boston is like the main 5 questions are how should rent increases be capped and to what level? What types of expenses should be able to be passed through to tenants and the exceptions to the rent cap? What the base level should the base level rent reset to the market rate when there's a change in tenancy? What types of property should be exempt from rent stabilization, and how should the policy be administered? So like all of those questions need to be answered. And in Boston's example, which I think we should follow, each of these was an entire public listening session where they brought in stakeholders from in the community to give their concerns, and they did a really good job of like stitching it all together into something that made everyone feel
That
good.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I was,
Chuck.
sorry, I was gonna say, Kyle, also the police is aware of this. There are considerations with respect to abuses by landlords, and I'm not saying all landlords, but some definitely are opportunistic in terms of the conditions they know their tenants to be in. That's gotta stop. There's got to be some way to institute regulations where they just cannot keep taking advantage of tenants because they're low income, or doing something to be able to derive more income than is warranted under the circumstances. There's a very free enterprise mindset with respect to this. And again, I think that it's cruel. I'll use the word, it's cruel.
David, any preferences?
Well, if I was paying attention, everybody's on the legislative side, right? So I could be a one-person second committee. No, I don't care.
Okay, so we'll have you as either. I'm happy because I think I'll probably go with number 2. And so then Connie, David, you don't have to make a decision right now, but I think, you can decide if you want to float or part of.
Well, whatever helps keeps things moving, I don't mind.
And I think we have to be cautious about putting more than half of people on one subcommittee hearing because
It would be good to have a balance of different voices.
We also have 2 other members who aren't here tonight as well. So there are 2 other people involved in all this as well too. So,
So I guess my question would be then, what would be So at our next meeting, if we're saying, okay, we're on a committee now, so what do we come to the committee with next time? At our next committee meeting?
This committee or the subcommittee?
What does the subcommittee bring as a report to the next meeting?
That's going to really, I think, be up to the subcommittee. So the subcommittee, because it's, again, in my mind, I'm thinking of it as a working group. You don't have to meet before our next meeting. You could meet a bunch of times. You could meet once. I think that's going to have to be determined by the subcommittee people when you get together, because that's the whole point, is that we don't have a roadmap. So we have a very focus for this committee and why we've come together, and the point of this being a committee, but the work itself is going to be the work. So I think that it's hard for me to answer that question.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, but I also know that if you don't set particular goals or, if there's not a question that needs to be answered, then you may not have any answer, and you could be sort of flailing around for a while without coming back and saying, this is what this committee has decided on how we're going to proceed. And when we come next time, we're going to have completed this part of what we're going to do. And we're going to tell you about that. And then, next time we're telling you about that. And this is what we're going to do for the next time. And I think it helps to keep things on track. And I realize the holidays are coming up, so it's probably not going to be like next month, but, but I think it helps to, keep people focused and on track as to what the goals are. As we've been talking here, we've had so many issues that have come up just in this, 1 hour, that we could spend a lot of time sort of spinning our wheels, just talking about these things and not actually moving in the direction we want to go.
Anna, sorry.
Let's have Connie go first and then you, Jim. Yeah.
I think a good starting place was we started with, could you give a presentation next meeting? Because I think that presentation is hopefully going to spur questions that then are the two committees could then say, okay, that's a good starting place for us to kind of start to dig in and think about that. So I think that's probably a really helpful place. And plus, given the fact that you put a bunch of information in there, it would be good to kind of like what's in there and kind of walk us through and kind of what that looks like. And then we could all from there think about how can we use this information to answer some of the questions or whatever. So I think for that, I think that's probably just a good place to start for us to all be on the same page at this point. So we can kind of
Yeah, I thought we needed
like
one
that
more
idea.
meeting before we broke into subcommittees.
You can certainly have another meeting. And I mean, there is a lot of information. I agree. I think, not to put this on you, Kyan, but I think it would be great to have you. You're the chair.
Happy to take that on.
So there is a ton of information in the shared folder that Kyan has put in there. And then just as a side note, it's not directly related to the goals of this committee, but I've also put in a lot of information from the clerk's office around Robert's rules and open meeting law and just some other general information, especially for those of you who haven't been part of a city committee before. So I would love for folks to at least review that as well before our next meeting, just to give a sense of kind of like how this kind of stuff works. And again, especially as we start breaking out and having other discussions, just to make sure that we're not breaking open meeting law, for example. So I think we should all just do some reading at the minimum before our next meeting. Jim. You have a-
Okay, so Donna, what I was gonna say is, and this is just my own perspective, I can't say for sure, but it is my firm belief with what's going on right now that the city, I mean, hopefully this will come to pass. We're gonna have to have some very resolute opposition to initiatives. I will explain what I'm getting at with respect to the three prongs of the wireless infiltration. It's going to be fierce if everything I see right now is accurate. And I want to see generally how much of a stance would the city have to oppose edicts coming either from the state or the federal government if there was any possibility that it would harm them. Because there's definitely evidence.
Well, I'll just add a quick summary of the material because I feel like that's a good segue to the next agenda item. But I just want to give a quick overview of the stuff that I uploaded to the drive. So there's a folder called Research and Reports that has the statewide housing needs assessment that was released earlier this year, the statewide housing plan that was released earlier this year, and that has a ton of data statewide. And then there's the Donahue Institute Building Homes, Building Futures report that I was an author on. Again, I'll say for the recording, I'm not representing the Donahue Institute, but I was part of that work. And that is a regional 4-county of Western Mass study that looks at rents and the housing market, there's a ton of good information there, and I can answer questions on that because I was involved. And then there's an advocacy report on rent stabilization that was released in 2025. I uploaded the National Low Income Housing Coalition High Cost of Housing National Report, as well as the State of Nations Housing released by the Joint Center for Housing Studies by Harvard. And that was also released this year. And then in the other folder called Boston Rent Control Home Rule Petition, there are the PDFs and the recordings of all of the meetings that Boston had with their legislative petition session. So you could spend 10 hours watching all those recordings if you want, but there's also all the slides and the PDFs there if you just want to scroll through and see what they did. In the top level of that folder, there's like an overview of the whole process and like the main pillars of the policy, as well as a copy of the home rule petition that they actually created and delivered to the legislature. So we have all of their stuff to sort of model off of and take what we want. So yeah. And also I can answer questions if you guys want to email me.
Yeah, I saw that stuff too, and I haven't looked at everything that you've uploaded, but I had seen the process that they had used, and I thought that was a really good way in which they heard from different constituencies about the issue. I think they had 4 separate meetings for tenants, developers, owners, small business, whatever. I forget what the 4 were, but pulled information that way to inform their presentation. So yeah, so that stuff that you put up there is really great. I am, and everybody should take a look at it. And that raised the question for me whether that is public information. Our meetings are in that folder.
So
can people get to that folder if they want to?
I believe all this information is publicly available. This is just gathering it together. I could be wrong, but correct me on that.
I mean, this is all public information.
Yeah. So it's just putting it in an easy to access place for us. So it's
No, I
nothing
understand
is.
that. I understand that. I'm just wondering if do you know, Connie? Do we have to make this public if we're
Anyone through FOIA, right, Freedom of Information, can like ask us for this folder, so it's accessible in that particular way. But
yeah? So they would get the link.
And we could provide like a read-only link to put in the agenda or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, and that's another thing. That's again why I'm really strongly encouraging that everyone read the clerk materials that I put in around open meeting law, all that stuff, so that we're all familiar. Just because I guess like the TLDR is, especially as we're emailing back and forth, no discussions in emails. So like for example, if Chaim's emailing us on a group email with something and you have some thoughts and you want to kind of discuss it, you just email him directly. Don't email everyone on the same chain because that will get us afoul of open meeting law. So again, like if there's a report in here and you're commenting on it, like don't do that. Leave that for the committee so that we can discuss it at the committee level versus having it be online and in the report itself. I don't think anyone's going to be commenting on reports that are in here, but just that's how we want to make sure that we're engaging appropriately.
All good to know.
Okay, my understanding was that so if Chaim sent something out and sent to all of us, that became a part of the public record. That was my understanding of it. So if I
it would
wanted
be part of
to,
the public record,
Yes.
but we just can't comment on it
discuss it,
because we were in a quorum at that particular point.
right? Okay,
It's the same thing with the subcommittees. Like we have to make sure that we actually don't have quorum with those subcommittees. So because then that would be a
So how many is a quorum for us?
9-5.
Tana Bagel, only 4.
Okay,
no, really?
got it. Right. But if Chaim and I want to have a private conversation, that's not necessarily public record. If we're talking about, like, oh, Chaim, I saw that you made a mistake here, and I want you to fix that.
Yeah, and like that's the beauty of
That never
subcommittees
happened,
is
by the
that
way, but-
like me, you and Kevin, if that was the subcommittee, we could meet and talk about this work and it
Yes.
wouldn't be a quorum and it wouldn't count as deliberation under open meeting law because we're working on something that we were
Right.
assigned as a working group.
So then when we bring that back to the larger community and report on it, then the larger community can access
And that's
it.
why, like, I mean, I think a lot of you have been communicating with me directly so that we're not.
You trained us well.
Exactly that.
And I guess
Yeah,
now
thanks
you
for
can
clarifying
communicate
that.
directly with me. I will
I
take your
pass it
emails.
over.
Yep.
But that it is helpful for us to just discuss this through
Yes.
because it is, this is a newer committee. We want to make sure that everyone's aware of just how we want to operate back and forth with each other. So-
Yeah, and we want to make sure that the public knows how to get information from us if they want it.
Mhm. So I think that's, as you were saying, a good segue into our next agenda item. And this is really a question, right? So I'll just preface it by saying that Jim brought me this question around an Eversource point, which I'll let you discuss, Jim. And it's really, I think we should discuss as a committee if this is connected to our focus or not. So Jim, take it away.
Okay, so it's not just Eversource. Let me preface by that. I have to say this is an expectation at a federal level, which why I asked the question I did of Donna, because the level of threat associated with wireless radiation has been overwhelmingly established. The industry and the FCC refuses to acknowledge it. They've been very, very obstinate pretty much ever since the finding was made by, I believe, the Supreme Court. Problem is threefold. Number one, with respect to price pressures, immediately it is going to be $32 extra for any tenant that decides they don't want the full boat with respect to Eversource. And there's no way I would trust them to have the judgment or the integrity to not avail themselves of the full spectrum of applications this technology can. As a basis of comparison, I spoke to an engineer at Chickpea Electric because I am very actively looking at how we can completely divest from Eversource as much as possible. And he told me basically that they have an AMI meter, which does have the capability for quote unquote smart features beyond just monitoring usage, but that they run it at 900 hertz, which is comparable to what a cordless phone would be. And the city does not allow them to do anything more than that. I believe Eversource will do anything they want based on the conduct. They had sent me a notice, as I showed Felicia earlier. I just got this today, where they're basically going to start rolling these smart meters out come hell or high water. Apologize for the curse. Starting in January, I would say, right after the holidays. And unfortunately, this is in direct parallel with the FCC's intent to be locating, in some instances, a cell fixture antenna every 750 feet within municipalities. It is basically just, they are just bound and determined is the only way I can put it. And I have spoken with a gentleman by the name of Samuel Milham. I don't know if anyone knows. He wrote the book, the defining book called Dirty Electricity, with respect to what's the formal term is stray charge or stray voltage. Something else that I was informed by the person at Chickpea Electric. Not getting too deep into the weeds with this, but the number one consideration with respect to immune system function has been identified by a lot of us as something called zeta potential, which has a parallel in any structure, whether it be organic / biological or not. You're basically in a position where the residents of Easthampton, including those who are in the least position to be able to absorb the cost of having to pay $32 a month to Eversource, to put their health in grave jeopardy as a consequence. This, I cannot stress, because of the ecosystemic conditions right now, the amount of proprietary nanomaterials and particles that have been ingested or internalized by people. This is a very dangerous thing that is being done. The three pieces of it, the third part I've not mentioned, and I'm going to push for a ban in Easthampton of any sort of requirement for biometric verification, because it is a key piece of this whole system to be able to monitor every aspect of our lives, including biological. In my estimation, Easthampton should not want to have anything to do with this. And if they are in a position that they can generate their own electricity, that's certainly one piece of the puzzle that falls away with respect to the smart meters. And that's good. But the problem is you've also got the FCC to deal with, and you've got the the tech industry. As I say, they are just absolutely determined to push this stuff through. And we've got to find some way in order to protect the health of people in this city to defy them at all costs. It is that grave.
Jim, I'm having a hard time understanding that how this really fits in with our mandate to analyze the housing market and to look at programs to advocate for tenants with respect to their housing requirements. I understand that it is an issue that is related to housing in some ways, but it's not. I don't see it as a piece of our mandate. So I would say that this is a discussion that I don't see how that fits into our mandate.
So I've been told by Representative Gomez that there's a bill that's just been introduced at Beacon Hill to actually address this. So I think there is some movement to try to prevent this from being able to happen. And also just this, I agree, I'm not sure if it's in here, but also I'm exploring, is there a possibility that we would be able to write an ordinance of some kind that would prevent this at the city level? So that's also
exactly what I'm seeking.
Being explored right now. So I'm just kind of waiting for a little bit of information to be able to try to address that.
Okay. And if I can interject, I am was made aware. I've been in communication with Kirsten Beatty from Last Laws. She says that the petition at the state level is soft in terms of the number of signatures. At this moment, she doesn't think that it's going to go through this year, which again, in as much as there's any real means for the state to intercede or desire, that's why the local aspect becomes critically important, because I just do not have faith with the way the climate is in terms of how much control is being exerted by the tech sector, that Massachusetts can step in and say enough is enough. We basically jeopardized our constituents' health, and it can't go on. As to your question, Donna,
Well, what I'm hearing Connie say is that this is being looked at in a different venue, and so again, I don't think it's our mandate here.
Well, I just want to clarify, because it's a very good thing you're bringing up. The only reason I am is because of the fact that it's going to have a direct cost effect on tenants, which makes it even more difficult under the present circumstances relative to stabilization and control. Affordability, it's going to make it more difficult if this is allowed to come to pass.
How do you mean? I think I know, but how do you mean it's going to have a direct cost? So if a tenant opts out of a smart meter, they have to pay $32 more?
That's right, $32 a month. The landlords, mine certainly have said they will not pay it.
Well, yeah, I mean, like my apartments are all separately metered, so it would be up to the tenant to decide that or not. That's how it would work.
Ostensibly, but again, you're basically asking them to risk their health.
I know, I understand it, but pragmatically, I'm also thinking if this committee puts forth a rent stabilization concept, it's going to go through home rule petition. Well, the Eversource thing, I didn't know about the bill Connie mentioned. In addition to that, this would have to be a Department of Public Utilities avenue. That's way out of our everything.
In what way?
Well, and it's
Well,
also
because they set they're in theory they regulate Eversource. Now I know Eversource tells them what to do, but that's a whole nother. That's even beyond Omar. I mean, in all honesty,
and that's what I'm saying. This is
also
required defiance.
It's also, we know that our renters have bills that are separate from their rent. And when we look at the rent, we look at the percentage of their income that they have to pay to rent to determine whether they are, what's it called, housing burdened, housing cost burdened, right? That analysis is not going to change. We know, we can say people should only have to spend this much money on their rent. according to their income. Those other costs and expenses, those are gonna ebb and flow, those are gonna change. That's not what we're looking at. We're not looking at the cost of food, we're not looking at the cost of electricity, we're not looking at how much gas they put in their car. We're looking at, what is the housing market? What is the rent? What are people making? How many people can pay the rents that are market rate? How many people need affordable housing? I mean, those are the things and what you're talking about, it's not a part of that piece of the picture. It's a part of this piece of the picture over here, but that's not our purview.
So,
I would say
Sorry.
that I think it sounds like really important advocacy, but I think like Connie mentioned, like there are other avenues that are like going directly through a counselor to try to get something drafted through ordinance committee
Yeah.
would make more sense. Or like I think we have an energy advisory committee from the city that directly I think looks at these issues around energy affordability and energy generation at the local level, like all that kind of thing. I think that would be a better venue to really have these discussions around our relationship to our power generator.
Are they aware of the safety factors? Is there a consideration with respect to safety in your estimation?
I mean, for me, I just feel like like you're making us aware of this, and I feel like
Yes.
the best advocacy you could be doing is making them aware of that.
Yeah.
And the power structure isn't 100% clear to me, so I get that.
Yeah, no, and that's totally
Yeah,
fine.
so we're just clarifying, and I think a lot of what has been said tonight it is all connected.
Yep.
And I think that's part of what makes it so complicated. But at the end of the day, for better or for worse, our committee has a narrow yet dual purpose. And so I think it's helpful for us to hear this, Jim, because it is tied to what we're talking about with burdening in general of renters and just anybody who is dealing with this and the health aspect of it. And I think that what we're hearing is that there's other places that are the better places to go first.
And now that I know that, I certainly
Yeah, which is
can
great. And that's
approach-
why, like, when we talked, I was
Yes.
like, you know what, let's chat about it at this level. I think that, you could make an argument that for like the subcommittee that you and I are going to be on, that
Right.
it's tangentially related. So it's good for us collectively to know that the Energy Advisory Committee and that, Rep Gomez is working on stuff and things like that. And there's probably other actions with that subcommittee that we can focus on more immediately that does fall within the purview of this committee. And this stuff is something that's helpful for us to know on the side. So,
And so I've done my job tonight anyways. People are aware of the risk. I'm not
Absolutely.
necessarily saying that I had any idea something could be done. It was a fact-finding effort on my part too. Now, I don't know who specifically to approach yet, but I'll find out.
we can help.
Some of us got
you know.
that same letter you got. I
What's
got that
that?
same letter today. So,
Okay. So they're obnoxious to a fault.
like,
With the chair of the Energy Advisory
Okay.
Commission,
Committee, I think.
yeah, so reach out to that chair and.
All right.
they
I
can-
absolutely will this week.
And if you have any problems finding that person, like, let me know
Count on it.
because we can help connect you. I can help
Okay.
connect you with that
I also
person.
think
You
you
need
should
the tech.
approach the
Yep.
Board of Health.
Oh, I'm already on that.
So I want to note that we are now almost an hour and a half into this meeting. And so I wonder if, do we want to set some parameters on our meetings in terms of the time structure? Want to be cognizant of everybody's availabilities.
Marathons are best.
I thought we were going till 9.
Well, it's funny, I was supposed to have another meeting at 6 and I was going to peace out, but it got canceled. So I'm happy to be here longer. So we can certainly put parameters on. I will say I've been a part of many different committees here at the city and it really ranges. Sometimes it's about people coming in to use the space. We are lucky tonight that's not been an issue for us. I've also been on committees where it's been 3-hour-long meetings. So I think I would probably say, because we're still just getting started, I would hesitate to put a strict time limit, but I also think we obviously want to be respectful of people's times. So, generally speaking, in my experience, an hour is usually around the time frame that we are looking at, but sometimes there will be more to discuss than other times. Sometimes it might be a 10-minute meeting. Probably not, but.
And I apologize for the imposition, should there have been one. As I say, it's a situation where I don't think there's enough awareness of this.
Thank you for raising up the awareness.
Yeah, no, I don't think I don't think it was improper, but I think we did need to decide that it was or was not appropriate for our committee to be spending a lot
At
of
large,
time on
for
it.
sure.
I think for the next meeting though, I think it'd be helpful for you to be able to look through the materials and decide what the presentation will entail, and then can give us a bit of a heads up of like, this is how long the presentation will be, and then from there we can maybe
Yeah,
slot in some time
I'm not
for
gonna make you
questions.
guys sit through more than like
Yeah.
15 minutes. Like I don't want to give a lecture, but like
Mhm.
there is a bunch of good information that I'll share.
In
Yeah.
general, if you have an hour as a soft cap, an hour and 15 minutes as a hard cap,
Yeah.
Yep.
people kind of
Focus in.
cut to the chase a little bit
Yeah.
and move on. You know.
Well, I mean, the good news is we're pretty much at the end of our agenda for tonight. So I do have a placeholder for new business, but I don't think we have any new business at this point.
I just wanted to pass
So,
out
yes.
a total food for thought article. I sent it to her in digital form too, so.
Oh, I think I saw.
Yeah, I put this in the shared folder as well. So if anyone wants.
And I would like it if we could set a date and time for the next meeting.
I have it on
Totally.
my reading list. So thank you.
It's totally food for thought, that's all it is.
I had a Atlantic article today, written by Judge Wolf. So he resigned.
If we want to try to set a date and time for the next meeting, I know 5 p.m. is very early for people, so this was an extenuating circumstance for this time only. So I think we had talked previously about trying to meet around 6 p.m. But you know, if we want to aim for another Monday in like about a month or so, what does the new chair think?
I mean, I think the 8th or the 15th look like potential candidates before the holidays.
The 15th is Hanukkah.
Oh, yep.
The 8th is probably a great day because after that, people just kind of zone out.
Good point.
I have a meeting at that night, for work, so that's hard for me.
What about the 1st?
I will be gone.
I need you to be there because you're giving us this presentation.
What about the
The 9th.
9th?
That would work for me.
Is that a Wednesday?
It's
a Tuesday.
And we have
Tuesday?
time to meet
Okay.
between now and the ninth.
6th?
Maybe Kevin also. if he wants to.
Tuesday the 9th at 6?
Sure. All right. Are you doing?
So we'll have to meet down to the clerk's office.
6 p.m.
And what I can do is I'll email you, or we can chat later, Chaim, about just logistics around how to get set up for the next meeting. So sounds good.
So we'll schedule for 6 to 7. And the hard stop at 7:15. And this is the Rent Stabilization Committee.
All right. So we have our next meeting scheduled. If there's nothing else, I would love to entertain a motion to close this meeting out.
So moved.
Second.
So moved.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All in
And do you
favor?
want to say-
Yes, all in favor. Sorry. All right. The ayes have it. 6:26.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.